Throughout the month of April in 1841, an astonishing declaration shattered the composure of even the most hardened and ruthless landowners scattered across South Carolina's plantation territories. Silas Rutledge, a determined man whose ambitions far exceeded his current social standing, was making arrangements that would fundamentally place his 28-year-old daughter, Catherine, whose physical form had expanded beyond 260 pounds due to prolonged medical interventions, under the comprehensive supervision and absolute control of an enslaved individual known as Ezekiel Cross. This shocking arrangement transcended conventional boundaries of servitude or companionship, effectively granting Ezekiel complete dominion over Catherine's daily existence, her activities, her treatment, and every meaningful aspect of her life, except formal legal possession documented on official papers. The privileged white aristocracy throughout Colleton County reacted with profound outrage and bewilderment at this transgression of deeply embedded social hierarchies and racial boundaries that formed the foundation of their entire worldview. Yet these scandalized observers remained completely unaware of Rutledge's actual motivations lurking beneath this seemingly incomprehensible decision, nor could they foresee the catastrophic chain of events this arrangement would ultimately trigger across the following months. For they possessed no understanding of what Ezekiel Cross would accomplish alongside Catherine throughout those fateful subsequent weeks, nor could they imagine the profound transformation that would occur in both their circumstances and the broader community. When November finally arrived with its cooling temperatures and changing leaves, Catherine's physical appearance had undergone alterations that defied every conventional medical explanation available at the time. 13 prominent community leaders lay deceased under circumstances that authorities could not adequately explain, and the expansive Cypress Grove plantation compound had been completely reduced to nothing more than smoking ruins, charred timbers and ash-covered foundations. The burning question that haunted every survivor and witness in the region centered on one fundamental mystery: what truly transpired between this enslaved man and the plantation owner's daughter during those transformative months between spring and autumn? What specific actions did he undertake with her cooperation that struck such profound terror into the hearts of all who witnessed even fragments of the unfolding events? Before we unveil these deeply disturbing revelations that fundamentally challenge our understanding of justice, revenge, and moral boundaries in antebellum America, please consider subscribing to this channel to support our continued research and content creation. Activate the notification bell icon to ensure you receive updates whenever we publish new investigations into forgotten historical events, and take a moment to share in the comments section which state or country you're watching from, as your engagement and participation helps us continue bringing these suppressed and overlooked stories back into public consciousness and historical discussion. Now, permit me to transport you back through time to the very origins of this extraordinary and disturbing tale, to the humid and oppressive low-country environment where immense agricultural wealth was constructed entirely upon the foundation of immeasurable human suffering, and where systematic cruelty was rationalized and justified as representing nothing more than the inevitable natural order of civilized society and economic progress. The arrival of spring throughout Colleton County brought with it an almost unbearable combination of intense heat and suffocating atmospheric humidity that transformed the very air into something nearly tangible and genuinely difficult to breathe comfortably. For extended periods, the Combahee River meandered sluggishly through the marshy low-country terrain, its murky and slow-moving waters reflecting the pervasive Spanish moss that draped from ancient and massive live oak trees like ghostly decorations perpetually adorning some endless funeral procession stretching across the landscape. Vast rice cultivation fields extended across the waterlogged landscape for countless miles in every direction, their intentionally flooded paddies requiring constant maintenance and cultivation by hundreds upon hundreds of enslaved human beings who labored without respite from the very first rays of dawn until the last glimmers of dusk disappeared completely from the horizon, moving continuously through standing water that frequently reached up to their knees or higher in conditions that systematically destroyed both physical bodies and psychological spirits through relentless exposure and exhausting toil. This remarkable agricultural prosperity and accumulated wealth represented nothing less than a massive economic system, constructed entirely upon the foundation of deliberate and systematic human suffering and anguish, prosperity ruthlessly extracted from the compounded misery of those human beings who had been legally designated as property rather than recognized as people possessing inherent rights or basic human dignity. The entire elaborate social and economic structure was consistently justified and maintained by wealthy landowners who had convinced themselves through increasingly elaborate rationalizations and self-serving philosophical frameworks that such profound cruelty and exploitation was simply the inevitable and completely natural order of civilized society and economic development. The Cypress Grove plantation property encompassed approximately 800 acres of moderately fertile and reasonably productive agricultural land suitable for rice cultivation and various other farming pursuits that generated substantial revenue for the ownership. The property's owner, Silas Rutledge, occupied an uncomfortable and frustrating position on the periphery of the county's true aristocratic elite circles, possessing considerable personal ambition and driving determination, but fundamentally lacking both the generational accumulated wealth and the crucial social connections that would potentially grant him entry into the most exclusive and powerful levels of local high society. His agricultural holdings included ownership of 58 enslaved individuals, a number that certainly established him as wealthy by most conventional standards and measurements of economic success in broader American society. However, this figure barely qualified him as mid-tier within the rigid and unforgiving social hierarchy that dominated the region, where the truly powerful aristocratic families controlled thousands upon thousands of acres of prime agricultural land and maintained legal ownership of hundreds of human beings whom they treated as property assets to be bought, sold, and exploited for maximum profit. These established aristocratic dynasty families spent their uncomfortable summer months in the more refined and culturally sophisticated urban environment of Charleston, sent their offspring to prestigious universities located in the northern states where they could receive elite educations, and possess surnames that carried such tremendous social weight and political influence they could effortlessly open previously closed doors to opportunity, or utterly destroy carefully cultivated reputations with merely a single spoken word or written recommendation passed through appropriate social channels. Silas had entered into matrimony with Elizabeth Yancey back in 1812, a strategic and carefully calculated union that brought with it moderate land, holdings of reasonable value, and a respected family name that carried some genuine social currency and recognition throughout the region's interconnected elite networks. Elizabeth had been a fundamentally pragmatic and relentlessly practical woman who maintained meticulously detailed written records of all plantation activities, crop yields, financial transactions, and business dealings, appearing far more genuinely interested in profit margins, agricultural productivity, and financial success than in the exhausting and time-consuming work of social climbing and endless networking among the county's established aristocracy. Her life came to a sudden and tragic end in 1813, when she died during an extremely difficult childbirth, bringing into the world a daughter who was christened Catherine just before Elizabeth drew her final breath and passed away, leaving Silas to face the challenge of raising a daughter alone. For the subsequent 28 years that followed, Silas raised Catherine in relative isolation from broader society, while simultaneously focusing his considerable energies and accumulating financial resources on gaining admission to the inner circles of county power and social influence that had long eluded his determined grasp despite repeated attempts and strategic maneuvering. Silas presented as a notably tall man, possessing the kind of pronounced thinness and gaunt appearance characteristic of people who frequently forget to consume adequate meals when their minds become completely consumed by singular obsessions and driving ambitions that override basic self-care and physical needs. His hair had turned prematurely gray at a relatively young age, bestowing upon him a severe and somewhat intimidating appearance that complemented and reinforced his fundamentally cold temperament and emotionally distant nature in interactions with others. Within business circles and commercial transactions throughout the region, he had gradually earned a reputation for being shrewd and calculating in his dealings, but sufficiently honorable and reliable in ultimately fulfilling agreements. The sort of man who would drive exceptionally hard bargains and extract maximum advantage from every negotiation, but would ultimately keep his word and fulfill his obligations once a formal agreement had been reached and terms finalized. His daughter Catherine had experienced a childhood marked by profound social isolation and emotional loneliness, receiving her formal education exclusively from private tutors hired to come to the plantation rather than attending any conventional school, never quite finding a comfortable place where she truly belonged. In either the aristocratic high society her father desperately sought to join, or among the common working people of the surrounding region. By the year 1841, Catherine had reached the age of 28, and her body weight had increased substantially to nearly 260 pounds due to continuous physical changes. Her physical form had become progressively swollen and distended, from years of continuously consuming various medications prescribed by physicians who had diagnosed her with hysteria, female nervous disorders, melancholia, and various other medical conditions that the predominantly male medical establishment of the era regularly used to categorize, control, and dismiss women who displayed behaviors or expressed thoughts deemed inappropriate, unacceptable, or threatening to established social order. She experienced violent psychological episodes during which she would emit piercing screams that could be heard throughout the house and hurl various objects across rooms with frightening force and destructive energy. The previous year, she had even physically attacked her own father with a letter opener during one particularly intense episode, leaving a permanent scar across his left hand that served as a constant physical reminder of her unpredictable nature and capacity for violence. When provoked or distressed, the white aristocratic society throughout Colleton County discussed her deteriorating situation in hushed tones filled with false sympathy and thinly veiled judgment, shaking their heads with practiced expressions of concern. They would repeatedly express pity for poor Silas Rutledge, so unfortunate and unlucky to be burdened with a daughter severely afflicted by progressive insanity. What a tremendous shame and tragic circumstance, considering she had been such an attractive and promising child before her condition manifested and progressively worsened. None of these gossiping observers knew the actual truth lurking beneath the surface of Catherine's deteriorating condition and increasingly erratic behavior patterns. Not a single person in those elite social circles possessed any understanding of what Catherine had personally witnessed when she was merely 12 years old, an experience so fundamentally traumatic and psychologically devastating it would have completely shattered the mental stability of most adults who encountered similar horrors. They remained willfully ignorant of the fact that her so-called madness was not true insanity or genuine mental illness at all, but rather a completely rational and understandable psychological response to living in dangerously close proximity with genuine monsters who wore the respectable public masks of gentlemen and respected community leaders. The letter that would irrevocably change everything arrived at Cypress Grove on April 7th, delivered by a private courier who departed immediately after handing over the sealed envelope without offering any conversation or explanation of the contents. Silas opened this unexpected correspondence in the privacy of his book-lined study, fully expecting routine business communications regarding crop sales, land transactions, financial arrangements, or commercial partnerships. Instead, he discovered 3 pages of dense text written on expensive and high-quality paper and sealed with distinctive red wax bearing a symbol he recognized instantly upon viewing, sending an immediate chill of recognition through his entire body. The marking displayed a scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the unmistakable emblem of a secret organization known to initiated members as the Brethren of the Harvest. The Brethren consisted of exactly 13 men scattered across the county who regularly gathered in darkness to perform elaborate ritualistic ceremonies. They genuinely believed strengthened agricultural land and ensured continued prosperity through offerings of blood and human flesh. These individuals had created a bizarre and disturbing hybrid belief system that intentionally mixed ancient European occult traditions with practices and esoteric knowledge they had borrowed and distorted from enslaved people who possessed their own traditional understanding of spirits, supernatural power, and the unseen forces that influence the physical world and human destiny. The core philosophy and fundamental worldview of the Brethren held that the strong were inherently meant to dominate and consume the weak in a never-ending cycle of power and subjugation. And when they used the specific term consume in their private discussions, they intended it in its most literal and horrifying physical sense, rather than as abstract metaphor. Silas had undergone formal initiation into this secret society back in 1822 through an elaborate ceremony he still occasionally remembered in nightmares, and throughout the subsequent 19 years, he had attended perhaps 40 separate gatherings of various sizes, participating in rituals that ranged from merely disturbing and unsettling to absolutely monstrous acts that violated every principle of human decency, moral behavior, and basic compassion. The letter delivered grim news that struck Silas like a physical blow to the stomach. He had accumulated substantial debts totaling $12,000, borrowed incrementally over many years of mounting gambling losses, and consistently failed investment ventures in various business schemes, creating an impossible financial burden he could never hope to repay through legitimate means. Full repayment of this staggering and overwhelming sum would necessitate selling most of his valuable land holdings and all of his enslaved workers to meet the debt obligations, effectively destroying everything he had spent decades painstakingly building and relegating him to poverty, social irrelevance, and complete loss of status. However, the correspondence offered an alternative path forward, a specific demonstration of absolute commitment specifically designed for society members facing difficult financial positions and seeking relief from otherwise impossible obligations. Silas would be required to take his daughter Catherine and place her under the complete authority and supervision of one of his enslaved men for a full calendar year without interruption, not as a temporary punishment or brief humiliation lasting days or weeks, but as a genuine and total transfer of responsibility and control lasting 12 full months. This enslaved individual would have comprehensive authority over her person, her daily activities and schedule, her medical treatment and dietary requirements, and absolutely every aspect of her existence and decision-making. Silas would be required to announce this arrangement publicly at a formal gathering of the county's most prominent families, explaining this shocking decision as an extreme and desperate medical measure necessitated by his daughter's deteriorating condition and the complete failure of conventional treatments. The public humiliation would be absolute and devastating to his social standing in the immediate term. In a rigidly hierarchical society where white women were supposedly considered precious and protected above all others in elaborate systems of chivalric ideology, Silas would be publicly declaring his own daughter worth less than his property assets, less valuable than agricultural equipment or livestock. But if he agreed to this humiliating arrangement and followed through completely for the full year, his substantial debt would be entirely forgiven and permanently erased from all records, and the Brethren would additionally provide significant financial support and business opportunities to restore and even enhance his social position. Once the demonstration period concluded, Silas sat alone in his study for many hours that night, unable to sleep or find peace, contemplating his limited options with growing desperation. He thought extensively about his circumstances and potential consequences of various choices available to him. Complete bankruptcy would destroy him utterly and permanently, eliminating any possibility of future recovery or rehabilitation. The Brethren organization maintained powerful connections to every judge, every lawyer, every politician, and every person of influence throughout the entire region and beyond. They possessed both the capability and demonstrated willingness to make problematic individuals disappear permanently if they became serious problems or threats to the organization. Alternatively, he could sacrifice his daughter's dignity and social standing to maintain his own position, power, and future prospects, the choice that society had systematically trained him to make throughout his entire life. Property considerations over people's well-being, power and status over fundamental morality and human compassion. He composed his written acceptance by flickering candlelight in the early morning hours and sent the sealed response before dawn broke across the landscape. 3 days later, another letter arrived with specific details, including a name and brief history of the selected individual. Ezekiel Cross, age 33 years old, purchased recently through an anonymous intermediary agent from a Virginia plantation located several states to the north. Documented skills included advanced carpentry work and herbal medicine knowledge passed down through family tradition. Temperament officially listed as quiet and consistently obedient in interactions with authority. What the carefully worded letter deliberately did not mention was that Ezekiel Cross had been specifically selected for precisely this unusual purpose, that his placement at Cypress Grove Plantation was no random accident or coincidental business transaction, and that he carried his own burning and consuming need for justice combined with the extraordinary patience to wait carefully for exactly the right moment to act when circumstances finally aligned in his favor. Ezekiel arrived at the plantation on April 13th in a covered wagon driven by a professional slave trader named Henderson, who specialized in long-distance human commerce. The wagon pulled directly to the main house entrance, highly unusual, since most similar transactions typically happened near the barns or outbuildings away from the primary residence. Silas emerged onto the porch, shading his eyes against the bright morning sun to see what was arriving. In the wagon bed sat Ezekiel, waiting calmly. The first characteristic Silas noticed immediately was his eyes and intense gaze. Most enslaved people kept their gaze consistently downward as a survival mechanism learned early and practiced constantly. But Ezekiel looked directly at Silas without hesitation, his expression appearing calm and carefully assessing his new owner. This unusual directness made Silas deeply uncomfortable. Suggesting this man would not be easily controlled or intimidated, Ezekiel stood tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches in height, with broad shoulders and lean muscle mass developed from a lifetime of demanding physical labor under harsh conditions. His skin appeared unmarked by whipping scars or severe physical abuse, suggesting previous owners who relied more on psychological control than physical punishment. His clothes were simple, basic garments, but clean and maintained, indicating personal pride and self-discipline. His hands were large and visibly calloused from hard work, but his fingers demonstrated a precision and controlled movement that suggested highly skilled craftsman work rather than just brute physical force applied to simple, repetitive tasks. Henderson climbed down from the driver's position and handed official papers to Silas to complete the transaction. Ezekiel Cross, as specifically requested by your associates. Previous owner reported he was consistently quiet, but highly capable at assigned tasks. Your associates particularly wanted you to understand this one was very carefully selected for specific purposes. Silas barely glanced at the transfer papers before signing them. He addressed Ezekiel directly to establish immediate authority. You understand why you are here and what is expected? Yes, sir. Ezekiel's voice was deep and measured, with a slight Virginia accent revealing his origins. My daughter is quite unwell, and conventional treatments have completely failed. You will be personally responsible for her ongoing care and daily welfare. Doctors have failed repeatedly. You claim knowledge of herbal treatments through family tradition. My grandmother was a recognized healer in our community, sir. She taught me extensively before I was sold away as a young man. The financial transaction completed quickly with minimal discussion. Ezekiel was shown to a small cabin located near the main house, intentionally separate from other slave quarters to maintain privacy and control. He was given basic supplies including bedding, simple furniture, and provisions for immediate needs, then informed his specific duties would begin the following day. He was clearly informed that his sole responsibility involved Catherine's care and treatment, and that failure to show progress or any attempt at escape would result in severe consequences for everyone involved. Ezekiel nodded appropriately and said, "Yes, sir," when required by social protocol. Then he was left completely alone for the first time since his arrival. For the first time since arriving at this plantation, he allowed his carefully controlled expression to change noticeably. His jaw unclenched slightly, releasing tension he had maintained throughout the entire transaction, and his shoulders relaxed from their rigid posture. He sat on the simple bed and pulled from inside his shirt a small cloth bundle he had kept hidden throughout his journey. He unwrapped it with extreme care, revealing a piece of worn paper with 3 names written in a child's uncertain and unsteady handwriting. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his beloved wife, his son, his daughter, all sold away from him 3 terrible years ago to a brutal plantation in Alabama known throughout the region for systematically working enslaved people to death through impossible labor demands and deliberate neglect. He had eventually learned through underground networks that all 3 had died within 18 months of their arrival at that Alabama plantation. Sarah died from untreated fever that progressed into fatal pneumonia. Benjamin died from an injury sustained during fieldwork that turned septic when denied medical treatment. Ruth died from simply giving up the will to live. A 6-year-old child who stopped eating because she could not understand why her family had been torn apart so violently and why her parents could not protect her from this incomprehensible horror. And Silas Rutledge had been the specific person responsible for selling them away from Ezekiel. Not because he desperately needed money to avoid bankruptcy, not because they had done anything wrong or violated any rules, but simply because he had been demonstrating to the Brethren membership that he could make hard decisions without sentimentality or weakness, proving he valued power and status above human compassion. He had deliberately split a loving family like kindling wood prepared for burning, destroying lives to prove a point to men who measured worth through capacity for cruelty. Ezekiel had spent 2 full years working his way gradually south through multiple transactions, deliberately arranging to get sold from plantation to plantation in a calculated pattern, always gathering crucial information and making strategic contacts. He learned about the secretive Brethren organization through careful whispers and late-night conversations. He learned specific details about their disturbing rituals, their membership roster, and their meeting locations. He learned they considered themselves completely above any conventional consequence or legal accountability. When the opportunity finally came to be sold specifically to Rutledge's plantation through the intermediary arrangement, Ezekiel knew immediately this represented his long-awaited chance for justice. He would have unprecedented access to Rutledge's house, to his private papers and hidden secrets, to his vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And sometimes genuine justice came not from courts or written laws, but from extraordinary patience and meticulous planning, and from being willing to become exactly as strategically ruthless as necessary to achieve righteous aims. He folded the paper with the 3 precious names and tucked it away securely against his chest. Then he lay back on the simple bed and stared at the ceiling boards above him, and began systematically planning what would come next in this dangerous game. His first official day began on April 14th, under uncertain circumstances. A middle-aged house slave named Judith, her hair already showing considerable gray, brought him upstairs to Catherine's room located on the 2nd floor. She knocked reluctantly, clearly dreading the expected response. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone to help with your medical treatments." A sudden crash erupted from inside the room, something heavy hitting the wall with considerable force. Then Catherine's voice emerged, slurred but filled with venom and barely controlled rage. "I do not want more treatments from anyone. Send him away immediately." Judith looked at Ezekiel with genuine sympathy born from long experience. "She has difficult days. This is clearly one of those days." Ezekiel opened the door decisively and stepped inside, closing it firmly before Judith could follow or intervene. The room was surprisingly large but oppressively dark. Heavy curtains remained drawn across all windows, blocking natural light. The stale air smelled of unwashed bedding and something else more disturbing: the distinctive sweet rot smell of mercury poisoning. Books lay scattered across the floor in disorganized piles. A shattered picture frame lay against the wall where it had been thrown. Clothes were everywhere, draped over furniture and lying in heaps. Catherine sat in a chair positioned by the cold and unused fireplace, wrapped tightly in a stained dressing gown, showing months of wear. Her dark hair hung loose and badly tangled, clearly not brushed in days. Her face appeared puffy and swollen, eyes unfocused and struggling to track movement. Her hands trembled continuously on the chair arms, an involuntary movement she could not control. She looked at Ezekiel with a progression of emotions: initial confusion, then instinctive fear, then rising anger. "Who are you exactly?" "I said absolutely no more doctors of any kind." "I am not a doctor, miss. My name is Ezekiel. Your father specifically asked me to help you recover your health. Help." She laughed harshly, bitterness saturating the sound. "That is what they all consistently say. Help, treatment, medicine. What they actually mean is poison. What they actually mean is chains. What they actually mean is silence." She stood suddenly with visible effort, swaying unsteadily on her feet. "I know exactly what this is. He is punishing me once again for remembering what I saw, for speaking about forbidden things, for refusing to forget what happened." Ezekiel stood completely still, deliberately non-threatening in his posture and movement. "What are you supposed to forget, miss?" The direct question caught her completely off guard. Her visible anger flickered momentarily to something more vulnerable and frightened. "You do not know anything." "I genuinely know nothing, miss. Only that your father says you are unwell and require assistance." Catherine studied him intently and carefully, as if really seeing him as an individual person for the first time, rather than just another threat. "You are not from here originally." "Virginia originally, miss. Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar beneath us?" Ezekiel's pulse quickened noticeably, but he kept his facial expression carefully neutral and unrevealing. "I do not know what you mean by that statement." Liar, no heat in the accusation. Just profound exhaustion. Everyone lies constantly. "It is always easier than confronting truth." She sat down heavily, her brief energy completely spent. "Just leave me alone. Tell my father his newest torment failed completely." But Ezekiel moved purposefully to the window and drew open the heavy curtains without asking permission. Bright sunlight flooded into the dark room. Catherine cried out sharply, covering her eyes against the sudden painful brightness. "When did you last go outside into fresh air, miss?" "I cannot possibly walk that far anymore. I am far too weak." "When did you last eat food without laudanum mixed in?" "The medicine is absolutely necessary. Doctors say so repeatedly. What if the doctors are completely wrong about everything?" Her hands came down slowly from her eyes. She stared at him with hope and terror mixed together in her expression. "What did you just say to me?" Ezekiel turned from the window to face her directly. This was the critical moment, the first card played in a dangerous game. "I said, what if the doctors are completely wrong about your condition? What if absolutely everything you have been told about your illness is designed not to help you recover, but to keep you controllable and silent? What if your father has been systematically poisoning you for many years to ensure you never become mentally well enough or physically strong enough to speak publicly about what you witnessed as a child?" Absolute silence filled the room. Catherine's eyes went wide with shock and recognition. Her constantly trembling hands suddenly stilled completely for the first time. For 30 full seconds, she just sat there completely motionless, her mind working frantically to process this unexpected validation. When she finally spoke again, her voice was noticeably different, clearer and more focused than before. "He told you everything. Your father told me absolutely nothing, miss. But I have functioning eyes. I know mercury poisoning symptoms when I see them. I know long-term laudanum dependency effects. Healthy women do not become like this without someone working very hard over many years to make them that way deliberately. Why would you say this to me?" Suspicion crept back into her voice. "This is a trick. You are testing me for him. I am telling you honestly, I can help you become truly well, clear-minded, strong enough to walk out of this room independently. But it will not be easy or comfortable. Your body has been dependent on those toxic medicines for years. Stopping will be extremely painful. You will feel significantly worse before you feel better, and your father definitely will not approve of this approach." "Then why would you possibly do it?" Ezekiel met her eyes steadily. "Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Rutledge to suffer, and the best way to make him truly suffer is to give him back a daughter who is sane enough to remember everything clearly and strong enough to speak about it publicly. The truth dangerously spoken so plainly and directly. But Catherine was damaged, not stupid or incapable of reasoning. She would instantly see through clumsy manipulation attempts, but genuine common cause that she might actually believe and trust. "You want revenge on my father specifically?" "Yes, miss." "What did he do to you personally?" "He sold my family, my wife and 2 young children, sent them directly to their deaths for no practical reason, except to prove something important to people who judge human worth primarily by capacity for cruelty." Catherine absorbed this information carefully, then nodded slowly with understanding. The Brethren. He sold them specifically for the Brethren organization. Not a question, but a statement of recognized fact. The Brethren, miss. You already know about them. She laughed, something manic emerging in the sound. You will learn everything eventually. Everyone learns eventually if they stay here long enough. She leaned forward intently. If I agree to this, if I allow you to help me recover, what happens then exactly? You get completely well, miss. And when I am truly well and strong, we decide together what to do next. We both have revenge to plan carefully. You have yours. Perhaps they align perfectly. Catherine studied him intently for a long moment. She spoke with absolute clarity and cold determination. I want them all deceased. My father, Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw, absolutely all of them. Every single man who stood in that cellar during rituals. I want them to suffer first, to know it is coming, to beg desperately. Then I want them gone permanently. The venom was shocking, not for its intensity, but because it came from someone society had dismissed as permanently insane and completely harmless. This was not madness at all. This was pure rage, concentrated and refined by years of forced suppression and deliberate gaslighting. Ezekiel nodded his understanding. Then we have a clear understanding, Miss Catherine. If we are conspirators working together, use my name directly. I cannot, miss, not where anyone might possibly hear us. We must be extremely careful. Then know something important, Ezekiel. Catherine's eyes glittered dangerously in the sunlight. I have ended lives before, 3 people specifically. House slaves who might have told my father about my lucid moments when medications wore off. I cannot remember exactly how I did it. The laudanum blurs everything into confusion, but I know I did it. They disappeared completely. Their families were told they ran away north. She smiled terribly. So if you plan to betray me, to use me temporarily, then dispose of me when convenient, know that I am not simply a victim. I am something considerably worse. Ice ran down Ezekiel's spine at this revelation. He had expected to find an ally, not someone whose capacity for violence might actually exceed his own. But he kept his voice steady. I believe you completely, miss, and I give you my word I will not betray you under any circumstances. Good. Catherine stood more steadily than before. Then let us begin this work. But I have one absolute condition first. When this is completely over, when we have had our revenge thoroughly, I want to die peacefully. I do not want to continue living with what I have seen and what I have done. You will help me with that final step too, agreed? Ezekiel had not expected that particular request, but he was committed now to this alliance. Agreed. Then we have a binding deal. Catherine extended her hand formally. After brief hesitation, Ezekiel shook it firmly. Her grip was considerably stronger than her weakened appearance suggested. Over the following week, Ezekiel began Catherine's recovery treatment with careful precision. He gradually reduced her laudanum doses incrementally, replacing portions with herbal tinctures he prepared himself. Valerian root for anxiety and natural sleep, chamomile for digestive distress and calming, milk thistle to help her damaged liver process accumulated toxins built up over years. The withdrawal process was absolutely brutal to witness and endure. Catherine spent 3 full days confined to bed with high fever, uncontrollable shaking and severe vomiting. Ezekiel stayed with her continuously through it all, holding a basin while she was violently sick, wiping her face with cool cloths, speaking quietly just to remind her she was not alone in this suffering. When the worst physical symptoms finally passed, she was extremely weak, but noticeably clearer mentally than she had been in many years. The constant hand tremor decreased significantly. Her speech patterns were less slurred and confused. She could focus on reading text for extended periods. Then the real difficult work began in earnest. Ezekiel had her walking short distances initially, from her room to the hallway's end and back, short journeys that completely exhausted her. But he insisted firmly on continuing every single day, pushing slightly further each time. He adjusted her diet substantially, bringing lean meats and fresh vegetables instead of heavy pastries and rich foods. He limited portions strictly, though she fought him constantly. Years of using food as emotional comfort, making restriction extremely difficult. While working systematically on her physical recovery, they talked extensively and privately. Catherine told him detailed accounts about the cellar, about what she witnessed at 12 years old. She described events in graphic detail that made Ezekiel's stomach turn violently, but he listened without interruption or judgment. She told him about years of systematic gaslighting that followed her initial trauma, her father methodically convincing everyone, including herself, that she was severely mentally ill, that she invented false memories, that nothing she said about anything could ever be trusted or believed. She told him about the secret journal she kept carefully hidden in a hollowed book, pages documenting specific dates and times when her father left late at night, names of visitors arriving at strange hours, terrible sounds from below that should not be physically possible. Ezekiel told her about his family in return, about Sarah, who sang constantly while working and taught their children to read despite the extreme danger, about Benjamin, who at 8 years old could perform mental mathematics that amazed overseers, about Ruth, who loved wildflowers and picked them to make their cabin beautiful despite their poverty. He told her how Silas came to the Virginia plantation with an official buyer's warrant, how he inspected them like livestock at market, how he agreed to purchase all 3 family members for reasonable price, then deliberately changed terms at the last moment, saying he only needed the woman and children, not Ezekiel specifically, how he deliberately split the family for no practical reason whatsoever, but simply because he could exercise that power. He smiled when he did it. Ezekiel said quietly, voice thick with remembered pain, "That is what I remember most vividly. My son crying desperately, holding my leg tightly, begging not to be taken. My wife trying to be strong, telling Benjamin to be brave. And your father smiled like it genuinely pleased him to cause that much pain." Catherine listened with newly clear eyes, filling with tears. "I am genuinely sorry. I know sorry is just a word that changes nothing. But I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not personally responsible for what he does miss. No, but I am completely responsible for what I choose to do next. And I promise you solemnly, Ezekiel, he will pay dearly for what he took from you. They will all pay." The formal announcement was scheduled for April 29th. 41 people gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room for what elegant invitations described as an important family announcement requiring attendance. The county's elite arrived in expensive carriages with impressive horses. Judge Pelham with his wife Eleanor, Reverend Crenshaw with his daughter, Marcus Fanning and his family, Benjamin Lyle from the bank. The meal was elaborate and expensive. Fresh oysters, perfectly roasted duck, multiple rice dishes prepared differently, sweet potatoes, fresh bread still warm, a towering multi-layer cake for dessert. Through it all, Catherine sat at her father's right hand, eating sparingly, speaking only when spoken to directly but volunteering nothing. Ezekiel served alongside other house slaves, moving quietly and efficiently, refilling glasses, clearing plates. He was invisible to most guests, as enslaved people always were. But he listened carefully to every word spoken, watched every interaction closely, filed away useful information. After dessert concluded, Silas stood and tapped his glass for attention. "My friends, thank you for joining us tonight. As you know, Catherine has been unwell for many years. We tried every possible treatment. Doctors from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing helped until recently." He gestured toward Ezekiel standing against the wall. 2 weeks ago, I brought in Ezekiel, who has knowledge of herbal medicine. As you can clearly see, Catherine is much improved. Clearer, calm, more herself than in many years. Polite murmurs circulated around the table. Catherine kept her expression carefully neutral, though Ezekiel saw her hands gripping her napkin tightly beneath the table out of sight. "This improvement," Silas continued, "has led to a difficult decision. Catherine requires ongoing intensive care, more demanding than our household can provide alone. After extensive consideration, I have decided Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare going forward. He will have complete authority over her treatment, daily activities, and living arrangements effective immediately." The murmurs changed tone noticeably, confusion now mixed with shock. Several guests exchanged significant glances. Mrs. Pelham's face registered pure shock. Marcus Fanning spoke up with concern. "Silas, I do not understand this at all. You are placing your daughter under complete care of an enslaved person permanently. I am placing her with someone who succeeded where all others failed. My daughter's health is more important than social convention." "But surely," Reverend Crenshaw interjected carefully, "there are other available options. a paid companion, a trained nurse, someone more socially appropriate. Silas's expression hardened noticeably. I have made my final decision. Catherine agrees fully. Do you not, daughter? All eyes turned to Catherine expectantly. This was the critical moment she could refuse, could expose everything, could bring it all crashing down immediately. Instead, she smiled, small and controlled, revealing absolutely nothing beneath. I trust my father's judgment completely. Ezekiel has been kind and his treatments genuinely help. I am content with this arrangement, perfectly delivered as rehearsed. But Ezekiel saw what others did not. Saw her knuckles white on that napkin, saw the dangerous flash in her eyes promising future violence. She was playing the required role perfectly, the obedient daughter. But inside she was screaming for blood. The evening passed in increasingly awkward conversation. Some guests left early, uncomfortable with what they witnessed. Others stayed to speak with Silas privately, asking questions they did not want public. Ezekiel caught fragments while serving. Are you certain this is wise? What will people say throughout the county? The brethren will not approve of this becoming public knowledge. That last comment from Judge Pelham, spoken low near the study entrance. Silas's response was too quiet to hear completely, but whatever he said made Pelham nod and clap his shoulder supportively. By midnight, all guests had finally departed. Catherine retired to her room. Silas went to his study. Ezekiel assisted with the cleanup efforts after the guests departed, then made his way carefully upstairs through the darkened hallway. He knocked softly on Catherine's door, barely audible. "Come in," her voice called from within. She sat positioned by the window, still wearing her dinner dress, looking out at the dark grounds stretching beyond. She did not turn to acknowledge his entrance. "It is done then," she said flatly. "I am officially your responsibility now. Property of property." How absurd this entire situation is. How are you feeling at this moment, miss? I want to burn this entire house down with everyone trapped inside it. But we must be patient and strategic. Is that not what you constantly tell me? Yes, miss, that is correct. I agreed to this arrangement because I want them to feel completely secure and unthreatened. I want them to think this is merely my father's personal eccentricity, nothing more concerning. I want them to completely forget about me while we work methodically on our plans. She turned to look directly at him for the first time. Did you observe their faces carefully? The disgust barely concealed, the pity that was completely condescending. They think I am utterly pathetic and broken. They have absolutely no idea what we are secretly planning. And what exactly are we planning in specific terms, miss? Catherine moved purposefully to her dresser and pulled out a wooden box she kept hidden. Inside were numerous papers covered entirely in her careful handwriting. I have been documenting everything I remember for many years now. Dates, names, ritual descriptions, all coded carefully. So it looks like meaningless nonsense, if accidentally found by servants. But I can decode every single entry. We have accumulated enough documented information to destroy 20 men at minimum. And will anyone believe us, miss? A woman recently recovered from diagnosed madness and an enslaved man with no legal standing. Absolutely not, which is precisely why we need proof they cannot possibly dismiss or ignore. Real physical evidence that is undeniable. She pulled out one specific page with particular significance. I know exactly where they keep their official records. The Brethren organization maintains a comprehensive ledger of all activities, every ritual performed, every offering made, every member's participation meticulously documented. It ensures everyone is equally guilty and complicit. My father mentioned it years ago before he realized I would remember such details. Where is this ledger kept specifically? In the cellar beneath the house. There is a hidden room beyond the main chamber where rituals occur. I never saw inside that secret room, but I heard them talk about it extensively. That is where they keep everything they cannot afford to lose or have discovered. Ezekiel felt excitement mixed with profound dread at this revelation. Such a ledger would be absolutely devastating evidence against them, but obtaining it meant going directly into the heart of the Brethren's private domain. We would need to access it when the house is completely quiet and empty. My father travels to Charleston monthly for business matters. The next scheduled trip is May 14th. He will be gone for 3 full days. That gives us exactly 2 weeks to prepare everything meticulously. We need the complete cellar layout, every room, every hiding place, every potential danger. I can help with that, I have been thinking about this systematically for 16 years. I know exactly what needs to happen, and in what sequence. They spent over an hour going through details carefully, speaking in whispers barely audible. Catherine sketched the cellar layout from her childhood memory with remarkable accuracy. Ezekiel asked specific questions about guards, keys, slave schedules, potential witnesses. When he finally left her room, it was nearly 2 in the morning. He made his way to his small cabin room, mind racing with possibilities and dangers. He was fully committed now to conspiracy with a woman who was simultaneously brilliant and damaged and genuinely frightening in her intensity. He pulled out the paper with his family's names and looked at it by flickering candlelight. I'm doing this for you, for Sarah, for Benjamin, for Ruth, for every person who suffered. Because men like Silas Rutledge believe power gives them the right to destroy lives without consequence. He blew out the candle and lay in complete darkness, listening to the house settle and creak. Somewhere below in a cellar he had never seen were secrets that could tear apart South Carolina's most powerful families completely. In 2 weeks he would go down there to find them and expose everything. The 2 weeks that followed passed with deceptive calm on the surface. Catherine continued improving dramatically. Her weight dropped noticeably. Her mind stayed sharp and focused. She walked further distances each day without exhaustion. More importantly, she was translating extensive sections of her coded journals for Ezekiel, filling in crucial details about the Brethren that made his blood run cold. The Brethren was not unique to Colleton County alone. It was part of a much larger network across the entire South. Connected societies operating in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond, different names but always the same fundamental structure. Wealthy men who believed their power derived from ancient practices of dominance and ritualistic offering. They believed they continued traditions going back thousands of years to ancient civilizations. Catherine explained one afternoon while they walked the grounds. European mystery cults mixed with things learned from enslaved people who possessed traditional knowledge. They twisted it into something absolutely monstrous. Justification for things that have no possible justification. And the offerings are not always human beings. Sometimes animals are used, but other times they take people who will not be missed by society. Enslaved individuals with no family connections. Poor white people who wander onto their properties. Once I heard my father mention a child in their discussions, but I do not know if that was literal or symbolic. Where do bodies go afterward? Swamps on every plantation property. Bodies go in and are never found or recovered. Alligators do the rest of the work, and this ledger documents all of it comprehensively. Every ritual for 40 years. Names, dates, detailed descriptions of what occurred. They keep it because they need mutual complicity and insurance. Everyone equally guilty, so no one can expose the others without destroying themselves simultaneously. May 14th arrived with morning fog. Silas left for Charleston early morning, taking his carriage and personal manservant. He would stay with business associates, attend to commercial matters, expected back evening of May 16th. That gave them almost 3 full days of opportunity. They waited patiently until nightfall before moving. The house settled into evening routine. By 10 o'clock, the main house was silent and dark. They met quietly in Catherine's room. She had changed into simple dark clothes, allowing freedom of movement, hair pulled back tightly in practical fashion. She looked like someone preparing for battle rather than investigation. Are you certain about this, miss? I have never been more certain about anything in my entire life. Let us go now. The cellar entrance was located in the kitchen behind the pantry storage. The door looked like ordinary wall paneling, but pressed correctly. It clicked open with a mechanism revealing narrow stairs descending into darkness below. The smell hit immediately upon opening. Damp earth and old smoke and something organic and rotting. Catherine noticed his physical reaction. You get used to the smell eventually. I wish I could say you stop smelling it completely, but I would be lying to you. They descended carefully and slowly, Ezekiel carrying a shuttered lantern, providing minimal light to avoid detection. The stairs were steep and worn from use, wood creaking with each step. After 20 steps downward, they reached the bottom. The cellar was considerably larger than expected, easily 30 feet square with low ceilings supported by thick wooden beams. Floor was packed earth, walls lined with stones weeping moisture continuously. At center was what Catherine called the altar. though now it looked like just a heavy wooden table. But dark stains on its surface and grooves carved in edges told their own disturbing story. Around the room were iron candle holders, clay jars sealed with wax, wooden boxes, a rack holding black robes with crimson trim. Along one wall, shelves containing books and papers. Catherine moved with certainty of someone following a memorized map. She led Ezekiel to the far wall, where stones seemed solid and ordinary, but she pressed one particular stone with specific pressure and something clicked mechanically. A section swung inward silently, revealing another chamber beyond. This hidden room was smaller, approximately 10 feet square, and here the Brethren kept its most protected secrets. The ledger sat prominently on a wooden stand in the center, like a sacred text. Massive book 2 feet tall and 18 inches wide, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. Next to it were smaller journals for different purposes. Around the walls were shelves containing jars Ezekiel deliberately refused to examine too closely. "There," Catherine whispered urgently, pointing at the book. "That is exactly what we need." Ezekiel moved to the stand and opened the book with extreme care. Pages were thick parchment covered in meticulous handwriting spanning decades, names and dates going back to 1800. Ritual descriptions written in clinical detail, like scientific experiments rather than acts of extreme violence. He began reading entries, and with each one his horror deepened substantially. These men had not just committed occasional violence, they made it completely systematic and routine. Regular gatherings every 6 weeks, rituals timed precisely to agricultural cycles, believing blood offerings fed the land and ensured prosperity. They had ended at least 37 lives over the years, probably many more. Mostly enslaved people, but also poor whites, indigenous people, anyone vulnerable and unprotected. And notes about consumption rituals. They had not just taken lives, they had consumed human flesh, pieces of victims prepared specific ways, consumed during ritualistic meals. They believed transferred power and vitality. "Dear God," Ezekiel whispered in shock, "this is far worse than I ever imagined possible. I tried to tell you repeatedly." Catherine's voice was flat and emotionless. "I watched them when I was 12 years old. I watched them cut pieces from that woman on the altar. I watched my father raise a goblet and drink blood. Then I spent 16 years being told I was insane, that I imagined it all, but I knew the truth. I always knew." Ezekiel turned pages, looking specifically for entries about his family. He found them in October 1838. 3 brief lines. "Purchased family unit from Virginia plantation. Woman Sarah, children Benjamin and Ruth. Separated from male to demonstrate resolve. Sent to Alabama contact. Payment received." 3 lines total. That was all his family's destruction merited in their records. "We need to take this entire book immediately," Ezekiel said, voice tight with rage, barely controlled. "No," Catherine's hand on his arm stopping him. "If we take it now, they will know immediately something happened. We need to copy the most important entries first for evidence." She was absolutely right. But Ezekiel wanted to burn everything to ashes, but revenge required patience, required being smarter than the enemy. They spent 3 hours working methodically. Catherine had brought paper and ink supplies. She copied entries about specific rituals, focusing on ones naming current members with explicit details. Ezekiel documented victims carefully, creating a comprehensive list of names and dates that could potentially be cross-referenced with other historical records. Exhausting work, made worse by the disturbing content they were copying. Several times Ezekiel had to stop, hands shaking too badly to write. Once Catherine left the chamber entirely, overcome by traumatic memories surfacing, but slowly and methodically they built their case. Page after page of documented evidence. They were so intensely focused on their work, neither heard footsteps on the cellar stairs above. First indication something was wrong was when light flared suddenly in the outer chamber, lantern light much brighter than their single lamp. Ezekiel looked up sharply, blood going cold with realization. Silas Rutledge stood in the doorway flanked by 2 other men. Behind them, at least 4 more figures visible in the main cellar area. "I must admit with genuine admiration," Silas said with unnerving calmness. "I am impressed you found the inner chamber. I did not think you would succeed." Catherine stood slowly, deliberately placing herself between her father and Ezekiel protectively. "You were supposed to be in Charleston for 3 days. I was supposed to be there, yes, but I never trusted your miraculous recovery completely, so I made alternative arrangements. I left this morning publicly, yes, but I returned quietly this afternoon and watched the house all evening from a distance, waiting to see what you would do." He stepped into the chamber, the two men blocking the only exit. "Did you really think I would not anticipate this possibility? That I would not prepare for the chance you might remember, might seek revenge? You have been poisoning me systematically for 16 years. Catherine's voice steady despite everything. "And you expect me to simply accept that and do nothing? I expect you to understand it was absolutely necessary. You saw something you should not have seen as a child. You could not possibly understand the significance. I could not allow you to destroy everything we built. I was 12 years old, and I watched you end a woman's life and consume her flesh. That was not incomprehension, Father. That was a reasonable response to witnessing pure evil. Evil is such a simple word for complex matters." Silas moved further into the room, eyes moving between Catherine and Ezekiel. "And you using my daughter to get to me, filling her head with ideas of revenge and justice." Ezekiel said nothing, calculating distances and odds rapidly. 7 men against 1, with Catherine in no condition to fight effectively. The situation looked hopeless. Silas seemed to read his thoughts accurately. "Do not do anything foolish. I do not want to hurt either of you permanently. Not permanently, but I cannot have this rebellion continuing." He gestured to the men behind him. "Bring them upstairs immediately. We need to discuss what happens next." They were taken forcibly to Silas's study and locked inside together. The room was windowless except for one high transom, impossible to reach without furniture. The door was heavy oak, locked from outside with a substantial bolt. As soon as they were alone, Catherine moved quickly to Ezekiel. "Are you hurt at all?" "No, miss, but we are in extremely serious trouble now." "Yes, but not as much as you think." She pulled something from inside her dress carefully. The papers they had been copying. "I managed to keep these hidden. He did not search me. Too confident in his control. That will not help us if we are deceased. We are not going to perish, not tonight at least." Catherine's eyes were calculating strategically. "My father will want to resolve this without ending my life if possible. I am still his daughter, his blood. That gives us leverage." Over the next hour they heard arrivals, voices in the hall, men gathering throughout the house. The brethren was assembling in full. Eventually the door opened. Marcus Fanning stood there, face grim and serious. "They are ready for you now. Come peacefully and you will not be harmed immediately." They were led down to the cellar again under guard. This time the main chamber had been transformed completely. All 13 Brethren members present, dressed in their ritual robes. Candles burned in every holder, creating dramatic lighting. The altar was draped with crimson cloth. 13 chairs arranged in a perfect circle, all occupied except Silas's at the altar's head. Ezekiel and Catherine were positioned in the circle's center, forced to stand facing Silas directly. The other members watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Silas removed his hood ceremonially. "Brothers of the Harvest, thank you for coming on short notice. We face a significant crisis. My daughter and her associate discovered our inner chamber. They saw the ledger. They were copying entries when I interrupted them." Judge Pelam spoke up immediately. "Then they must be silenced permanently. This is not complicated." "I disagree strongly." Silas held up a hand. "My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options first. And the man represents an opportunity we should consider." "What opportunity exactly?" Reverend Crenshaw asked skeptically. "To test something I have long believed, that a person can be drawn into our work through their own actions if framed correctly." Silas turned to Ezekiel directly. "You want revenge on me personally. You want to destroy me for what I did to your family. I understand that completely. But what if I offered you a different kind of revenge, a more meaningful one?" "I do not understand what you mean," Ezekiel said carefully. "I am offering you membership, not as an equal, obviously. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members, but as an associate with privileges, you would attend our gatherings, participate in rituals, and in exchange I would give you what you want most. My family is deceased. You cannot give me what I want." "No, but I can give you revenge against the people who ended their lives. The plantation owner in Alabama, who worked your wife and children to death, His name is Edward Gaines. He is not part of the Brethren. He has no protection from us. If you join us, prove your loyalty. I will give you resources to destroy him. Money, information, whatever you need to make him suffer as you have suffered. The offer hung in the air, obscene in its calculation. Join the men who destroyed his family to get revenge on another monster. And if I refuse this offer, then you and Catherine both perish tonight. Your bodies go into the swamp. No one will ever know what happened. The papers Catherine was copying will be burned. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues as it always has. Silas spread his hands. But if you accept, you both live. Catherine lives. You get your revenge. All it costs is your soul and complicity. Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the slightest shake of her head. Do not do it. Whatever happens, do not become them. But Ezekiel was thinking strategically about accepting, about getting inside their organization, about gathering more evidence, about buying time for planning. He looked back at Silas and Catherine. What happens to her specifically? She returns to her room, resumes her medications, forgets what she has seen. The alternative is she perishes alongside you. No, Catherine's voice cut across the chamber. I will not forget again. I will not be silenced anymore. End me if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are. Silas's expression hardened noticeably. Then you have made your choice. Wait, Ezekiel spoke quickly. I accept your offer, but on one absolute condition. Catherine goes free, not back to her room. Free completely. Let her leave this house. Leave South Carolina entirely. Give her money to start over. If you do that, I will join you. Several Brethren members shook their heads disapprovingly, but Judge Pelam spoke thoughtfully. The boy makes a valid point. The girl is already broken mentally. Even if she spoke, who would believe her? But a man willing to join us, to be complicit, that is valuable. That proves our power extends even to those who hate us. Silas considered carefully. Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have associates in Philadelphia who will take her in. She will be given a new identity and stipend to live on, but she can never return to South Carolina. Never contact anyone from her old life. She will be deceased to everyone here. Agreed. Catherine stared at Ezekiel in disbelief. No, I will not leave you to them. Agreed, Ezekiel interrupted firmly. She goes free. I join you. Then we have a binding bargain. Silas turned to the others. Catherine leaves tomorrow morning. Ezekiel's initiation will be in 3 weeks at the next regular gathering. Until then, he remains at Cypress Grove under constant watch. If he tries to escape or contact anyone, the deal is void and both perish. Understood completely? Ezekiel nodded. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but Ezekiel caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Trust me. Catherine left the next morning early. A closed carriage took her away at dawn. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window as it rolled down the long drive and disappeared into the trees. She had not been allowed to say goodbye. He had not been allowed to speak with her after the confrontation in the cellar, but as she had been escorted to her room the previous night, she had looked back at him once, and in her eyes he had seen something that gave him hope. She understood his strategy. She knew he had not truly surrendered. She knew this was tactics, not defeat. The question was whether she would actually go to Philadelphia, or whether she had her own plans developing. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Ezekiel's entire life. He was kept under constant surveillance. 2 overseers followed him everywhere. He was not allowed to leave the plantation grounds under any circumstances. He was given menial work to keep him occupied, meaningless tasks that accomplished nothing but filled time. But he was also given access to the main house, to the study where Silas kept his papers, to the cellar where the next gathering would take place. They were watching him constantly, yes, but they were also testing him, seeing if he would try to escape, seeing if he would attempt sabotage. Ezekiel did neither. He played the role of defeated man who had made a pragmatic choice for survival perfectly. He was quiet, obedient, asked no questions, caused no problems whatsoever, but he was observing everything constantly, learning the routines of the house, noting which enslaved people could be trusted, which overseers were cruel, which Brethren members visited regularly. He was building a mental map of how everything worked, looking for weaknesses systematically, and at night, alone in his cabin, he thought extensively about what was coming. His initiation would require participation in their rituals. They would test him severely. They would want to make him complicit in something horrible, so he could never expose them without destroying himself. He thought about how far he was willing to go, what lines he would absolutely not cross even for revenge, whether there was any act so terrible that justice did not justify it. He did not have good answers to those questions. On June the 2nd, the night before his initiation, Silas came to his cabin unexpectedly. It was late after midnight. Ezekiel woke to knocking and opened the door to find his owner standing there alone. "May I come in?" Ezekiel stepped aside. Silas entered and looked around the sparse room. "Tomorrow you will become one of us. Not fully, never fully, but enough. I want you to understand what that means. I understand what I agreed to. Do you truly? Do you really understand?" Silas sat on the single chair uninvited. The Brethren has existed for 43 years. In that time, we have never lost a member to exposure, never had someone break our code of silence. Do you know why? Because everyone is equally guilty. Partly, but also because we take care of each other. A man joins the Brethren and suddenly doors open. Business opportunities appear. Legal problems disappear. Enemies find themselves in difficulty. We are not just a society, Ezekiel. We are a network of power that extends across the entire South. Once you are part of that network, even as an associate, you will have access to resources you cannot imagine. And in exchange, I help you end lives. Silas did not flinch. In exchange, you help us maintain the natural order. The strong over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. That is how the world has always worked. We simply acknowledge it and use it to our advantage. You ended my family to demonstrate your commitment to that order. I did, and I would do it again because sentiment is weakness. Love is weakness. The moment you allow yourself to care more about individuals than about power, you have already lost. Silas leaned forward. But here is what I want you to understand clearly. Your family is deceased. Nothing you do will change that. But you can ensure their deaths meant something. You can use the power the Brethren offers to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. You can work from inside our organization to make changes, to push for less brutal treatment of enslaved people, to advocate for better conditions. You will have a voice at our table that is worth something. It was almost convincing, almost. The idea that Ezekiel could become some kind of reformer from within, using his position to help others. But he knew it was a trap, a rationalization. The moment he participated in their rituals, he would be compromised forever. The moment he accepted their power, he would be corrupted by it. "Why are you telling me this?" Ezekiel asked. "Because I want you to succeed. Because having you as an ally is more valuable than having you as an enemy. Because I ended your family, but I do not want to end you." Silas stood. "Tomorrow night you will be asked to do something difficult. Something that will test whether you truly commit to this path. I am telling you now, whatever you are asked to do, do it. Do not hesitate. Do not show weakness, because if you fail the test, both you and Catherine perish. Yes, I know she is not really in Philadelphia. I know she is hiding somewhere planning her own revenge. But I have people watching for her. The moment she surfaces, if you have not proven yourself, she will be found and eliminated. Do you understand?" Ice flooded through Ezekiel. Catherine was alive, but she was in danger, and his actions tomorrow would determine whether she lived or perished. "I understand completely," he said quietly. Silas nodded and left without another word. Ezekiel sat alone in the dark cabin, thinking about the impossible position he was in. He had to participate in something monstrous tomorrow, had to prove himself to monsters, had to become complicit in evil, or he had to find another way. The third option, that neither Silas nor the Brethren anticipated. He pulled out the paper with his family's names, looked at them in the moonlight coming through the window. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for what I am about to do, for what I have to become. I promise you it will not be for nothing." The gathering began at midnight on June 3rd. Ezekiel was brought to the cellar by two Brethren members who stripped him to the waist and tied his hands behind his back firmly. They led him down the stairs into the candle-lit chamber, where all 13 members waited in their robes. Silas stood at the altar's head. "Brothers of the harvest, tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any in our history. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to hate us, a man who has lost everything because of what we represent. We do this to prove that our power extends even to our enemies. That anyone can be brought into the fold if the price is right." He gestured, and 2 more Brethren members brought forward a figure bound and gagged, struggling weakly. They placed the person on the altar and stepped back. It was a young woman enslaved, maybe 18 or 19 years old, terrified. "This is your test, Ezekiel," Silas said coldly. "To join us, you must participate in our ritual. You must take the knife and make the first cut. You must prove that your desire for revenge against Gaines is stronger than your moral objections to our methods. If you refuse, you perish here tonight. If you accept, you become one of us, and we help you destroy the man who ended your family." The other Brethren members began chanting low, rhythmic sounds in a language Ezekiel did not recognize. The candles flickered. Shadows danced on the walls. Silas held out a knife. Long blade, wickedly sharp, handle wrapped in leather. "Take it. Make the choice now." Ezekiel looked at the woman on the altar. She was crying, trying to scream through the gag. Her eyes found his, and in them, he saw every enslaved person who had ever suffered at the hands of people like the Brethren. He saw Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. He looked at the knife, at Silas, at the 13 men watching to see what he would do. This was the moment, the point where he would either become a monster or perish resisting. But there was a third option, one he had been planning for 3 weeks, one that required perfect timing and absolute commitment. He took the knife firmly. The Brethren members nodded approvingly. Silas smiled. The chanting increased in intensity. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar. The woman's eyes went wide with terror. He raised the knife and then he moved, not toward the woman, toward the nearest Brethren member. The knife flashed in the candlelight and buried itself in the man's throat before anyone could react. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Ezekiel grabbed the fallen member's robe, pulling it off in one motion. He threw it over the nearest candles, plunging half the room into darkness. Chaos erupted. He moved through the confusion like violence incarnate. Years of rage focused into action. He grabbed another man, using him as a shield as someone swung at him, threw the body into 2 more members, tangling them, kicked out at a knee, heard bone crack, grabbed a candle holder, and smashed it into a face. The Brethren were powerful men, but they were not fighters. They were soft, privileged, used to others doing violence for them. Ezekiel was none of those things. He fought toward the altar where the woman lay, grabbed her, cut her bonds with the knife he had somehow kept hold of. "Run up the stairs now," he shouted. "Run and do not look back." She scrambled off the altar and fled upward. Ezekiel turned back to face the remaining Brethren members, 7 of them still standing, blocking the stairs. "You have made a terrible mistake," Silas said, his voice steady despite the carnage. "You have ended yourself and Catherine both." "Maybe so," Ezekiel said, "but I will take as many of you with me as I possibly can." What he did not know was that above them in the main house, Catherine had returned. She had never gone to Philadelphia as instructed. She had been hiding in the slave quarters, waiting patiently, planning meticulously, gathering allies among the enslaved people of Cypress Grove. And when she heard the commotion from the cellar, when she saw the young woman burst from the kitchen screaming, she knew it was time. The reckoning had arrived. Catherine had spent 3 weeks recruiting carefully. She had moved from plantation to plantation under cover of darkness, speaking to enslaved people she had known her whole life, people who had watched her grow up, who had suffered under her father's ownership. She told them about the Brethren, about the cellar, about the rituals and victims. And she told them that tonight was the night they could end it permanently. 23 people came, men and women who had nothing left to lose, who had lost children to the Brethren's rituals, who had watched friends disappear into the swamps, who had endured decades of brutality from men who believed themselves untouchable. They came armed with tools from the fields, axes, scythes, hammers. They came with rage that had been building for generations. When the young woman burst from the cellar, Catherine led them down. The Brethren members, still trying to subdue Ezekiel, did not hear them coming until it was too late. The enslaved people flooded into the cellar like a tide of righteous fury. There was no mercy in what followed, no hesitation. These were people who had been told their entire lives they were property, that their suffering did not matter, that their lives had no value. Now they were proving how wrong those beliefs were. The Brethren tried to fight back. Judge Pelham pulled a pistol. but was struck down before he could fire. Reverend Crenshaw begged for mercy and received none. Marcus Fanning tried to flee up the stairs and was dragged back down. Silas Rutledge, seeing everything collapse around him, tried one last desperate play. He grabbed Catherine, pulling her to him with a knife at her throat. "Stop immediately. Stop or I end her right now." The room went still. Catherine looked at her father with no fear in her eyes whatsoever. "Do it then. End me. It changes nothing. You have already lost everything. I can still escape. I can still get away and rebuild. You can still nothing." Catherine's voice was ice cold. "You spent 16 years trying to break me, trying to make me forget, trying to convince me I was insane. But you failed completely. I remembered everything, and I am going to watch you perish." She drove her elbow back into his ribs with sudden, vicious force. His grip loosened. She spun away. And before Silas could recover, Ezekiel was there. They faced each other, the enslaved man and the plantation owner. All the power Silas had held, all the privilege and cruelty, all the years of believing himself untouchable, none of it mattered now. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said quietly. "My wife, my children, my life. You did it for no reason except that you could, to prove something to men who valued cruelty over humanity." "Please," Silas said, just that one word, pathetic and desperate. "Did my wife say please when you separated us? Did my son? Did any of the people you ended in this cellar over decades?" Ezekiel shook his head. "No mercy, not for you, not ever." What happened next was brutal and final. The enslaved people made sure none of the brethren survived. 13 men who had believed themselves above consequence learned in their final moments that power was an illusion. That cruelty always came home eventually. When it was over, Catherine stood in the center of the cellar, surrounded by fallen bodies. She was shaking not from fear but from release. 16 years of rage given outlet at last. Ezekiel came to her. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine." "Are you injured?" "Minor cuts." "Nothing serious." He looked around at the carnage. "What do we do now?" Now Catherine's smile was grim. "Now we burn it all. The cellar, the ledger, the evidence. We destroy every trace of what happened here. But that evidence could prove what they did, could bring justice through courts." "Justice?" Catherine laughed bitterly. Ezekiel looked around. "This is justice, the only kind we were ever going to get. If we try to take that ledger to authorities, what happens? We are hunted down and eliminated. The surviving Brethren members in other counties come for us. This only ends if everyone believes the Cypress Grove chapter perished in an accident. If there is no evidence, no witnesses, no story to tell." She was right, and Ezekiel knew it. "Then we burn everything." They spent the next 2 hours preparing. The enslaved people who had helped them left before dawn, disappearing back to their various plantations. They would say nothing. They had seen nothing. They knew nothing. That was how survival worked. Catherine and Ezekiel poured oil through the cellar, stacked wood and kindling, placed the bodies in positions that might look like an accident if anyone investigated. Then they took the ledger and all the journals and placed them in the center of the altar. "Wait," Ezekiel said. He opened the ledger one last time and found the entries about his family. He carefully tore out those pages and folded them, placing them inside his shirt. "For them, so they are not forgotten." Catherine nodded, understanding. Then she took a candle and held it to the oil-soaked wood. The fire caught immediately. Within minutes, the cellar was ablaze. They fled up the stairs and out of the house, stood in the yard watching as flames engulfed Cypress Grove plantation. People would come. Other plantations would see the smoke. There would be questions. But Catherine and Ezekiel had their story prepared. A terrible accident. A candle knocked over in the cellar. The master and his guests trapped below. So tragic, so terrible. No one would ever know the truth. As the sun rose over the burning ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. "What will you do now? Go north. Use the chaos of this fire to disappear. Maybe find others who want to fight, to create a network that can help people escape." He pulled out the paper with his family's names. "I cannot bring them back, but I can make sure others do not suffer the same fate. And I will go north as well. Use the money I have been stealing from my father's accounts for years. Start over somewhere new," she paused. "But I will not forget. I will document everything that happened here. I will write it all down so that someday, somehow, someone knows the truth. They will suppress the records. They will suppress your testimony too if you try to make it public." Then I will hide it. I will code it. I will leave it somewhere to be found decades from now when we are all deceased, and it cannot hurt us anymore. She looked at the burning house. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even when people try to bury it. They stayed until the fire burned itself out completely, until Cypress Grove Plantation was nothing but ash and blackened timbers, until there was nothing left to show that 13 men had gathered there to commit atrocities over decades. Then they walked away in opposite directions, Catherine north toward Charleston and eventually Philadelphia, Ezekiel west toward the frontier, where enslaved people could disappear into communities that asked no questions. They never saw each other again. The official story was exactly as they had planned. A tragic accident. Silas Rutledge and 12 prominent gentlemen meeting at Cypress Grove to discuss business when a fire broke out unexpectedly. All 13 perished in the cellar, overcome by smoke before they could escape. A terrible loss for Colleton County. Funerals with full honors, eulogies praising their contributions to society. Catherine Rutledge was reported to have perished in the fire as well. Her father's troubled daughter trapped in her room, unable to escape. A particularly sad footnote to an already tragic event. No one questioned it. No one looked too closely. The enslaved people who had participated said nothing. They had no reason to speak and every reason to remain silent. They scattered across South Carolina and beyond, carrying their secret with them to their graves. Years passed slowly. The ruins of Cypress Grove were eventually demolished completely. The land sold to new owners, new buildings constructed on the same ground. Life moved on as it always does, covering over the past with the present, burying old horrors beneath new beginnings. But whispers persisted in certain circles, stories told in slave quarters late at night about the plantation where the masters burned, about the night justice came to men who thought themselves untouchable, about the woman and the man who made it happen. The stories changed with each telling, becoming legend, becoming myth, but the core remained unchanged. That cruelty had consequences. That power was not absolute, that sometimes the powerless found their power. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops occupied the area where Cypress Grove had stood. They found evidence of old tunnels beneath the property, found bones in the nearby swamp, found markings on trees that suggested ritual sites had existed there. But the war moved on rapidly, and no one had time to investigate further. In 1971, during demolition work for a new development, a journal was found sealed in a wall cavity. It detailed everything in explicit terms: names, dates, rituals, victims. But as Catherine had predicted decades earlier, it was elaborately coded. And before anyone could fully decode its contents, the journal vanished mysteriously from county records. Some say it was destroyed to protect reputations. Others say it was taken by descendants of the Brethren families, protecting their ancestors' secrets. A few believe it still exists somewhere, waiting patiently to be rediscovered when the time is right. What is known with certainty is this: 13 prominent men perished in a fire in 1841. Catherine Rutledge disappeared shortly afterward, though no body was ever confirmed found. An enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross was reported sold to a plantation in Alabama, but no record of the transaction exists in any archive. And for years afterward, stories circulated among enslaved communities about a network helping people escape, led by a man who had faced the monster and won. Whether those stories were true or just wishful thinking, no one can say for certain. But sometimes truth lives not in official records, but in the stories people tell, in the memories they keep, in the justice they remember. Even when history tries to forget, this mystery reveals to us that power built on cruelty is never as solid as it seems. That secrets kept in darkness eventually find light. That the people deemed powerless often hold the most dangerous power of all. The power of witness, the power of memory, the power of refusing to forget. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe everything was truly revealed, or are there still hidden layers? Do you think that coded journal still exists somewhere waiting to be discovered? Leave your comment below with your theories and perspectives. If you enjoyed this dark historical mystery and want more stories like this that explore forgotten chapters of history, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between history and horror. These stories need to be remembered and told. These voices need to be heard and honored. See you in the next video.